What's up, guys? I'm back in the park today, and today I just want to kind of pick it up where I left off yesterday because this is very much related. And these are just my thoughts, so feel free to skip this if you want, just ramblings. But what I feel like is happening is a lot of the ADHD discussion and neurodivergence discussion is blowing up. But these are, to a large extent, not really true, authentic ADHD diagnoses. Like, in a way, it's similar to what diabetes has become. It's been a mass phenomenon, a thing that affects, large parts of society where people don't eat right, like the US, like Mexico, where you have some of the highest obesity rates in the world. So it's a consequence of lifestyle, diet, obviously, lifestyle, being sedentary, and the same thing can be said about ADHD. I don't need to have science back me up on this, although there is actually some first scientific research that will corroborate it, and I got this from Andrew Huberman and one of his guests, Dr. John Cruz, I think is his name. Basically the tendency to diagnose young people, going to school, like teenagers, this tendency to diagnose them with ADHD and put them on medication is obviously part of a big machinery of the pharma industry, where they obviously make good money with all the drugs. And I guess the drugs do help people focus and all that. That's fine. But the point is that it's just not necessary to let it come to this point, right? We are all making our attention spans so much worse by being on our devices all the time and consuming information, and there's just so much information. And one of the hardest things, probably the hardest thing of today, the hardest challenge to navigate, is not consuming too much information. It's just so easy and it's so enticing because we're curious, we want to know, but it's actually not good for us to just keep consuming information, putting it in there, having all these stimuli, and never actually doing anything about it ourselves, like not being creative, not being proactive, not putting anything out there ourselves. I for the longest time was struggling with just input, taking things in and never producing output from that. And it's so hard if you don't start training that muscle. It's so difficult to believe that you can also, create something from all the knowledge and the experiences you have accrued. And so ADHD, I think, is to a large extent the problem of too much information being taken in by the young brain. And even later, even more mature brains also will develop ADHD-like symptoms. I'm sure if I went to see a doctor about it, I could also convince him that I have ADHD, because a lot of these symptoms are just very enigmatic, and yet they're enigmatic, they're hard to put words around, but they're also so, you can basically observe them in every other person nowadays. I would say maybe more than 50% of people, even much older adults, are developing these symptoms later in life because they started using phones and just constantly being inundated with information, most of which is bullshit information. But even the good information, there's also plenty of good information and really interesting stuff where, there's so much to learn. But even then, it is easy to develop ADHD-like symptoms. So all of this is to say, if your son right now is on ADHD medication because he got a diagnosis, if you're offended by this, that's fine. But I mean, it's fine for me, not for you, but fine for me. Fine by me if you're offended by this. But I'm pretty convinced that there's a good chance that your son doesn't actually have any sort of initial genetic wiring for ADHD, and probably doesn't even have ADHD unless we kind of redefine, unless the rules have just loosened a whole lot around what it means to have ADHD. I think most of us in today's society have ADHD according to this very loose definition of what it is, and the real thing that we should be working around or working with is our habits, our behaviors, and not trying to like medicate it. Like that's just crazy. Because as far as I'm concerned, that's a slippery slope. Once you get started with one drug or medication, then what's there to think that you're going to get off of that anytime soon, or that you're ever going to get off of that path of medicating problems that have resulted from unhealthy behaviors. All right? So I think a lot of this neurodivergence discussion is part of our greater therapy culture and hypersensitive comfort culture, where we are easily offended by things. If we don't include and if we don't tolerate that somebody is different, like everybody in a way is different, right? Everybody has their own wiring, their own programming, works in has their own peculiarities, idiosyncrasies, and so on. Everybody. And so let's be inclusive of everyone, of course, but let's not take it too far with all the labels and all the like, oh, I'm such a special snowflake because I have ADHD, so I need extra cushioning and extra care, or special treatment rather would be the right word. Because in a way, we're all just most of us are not monks, or most of us don't live on, don't live an ascetic life far away from the internet. We are all connected, otherwise we wouldn't be watching this. And the information intake is just a barrage of both good and bad information, both true and false information. But the real challenge is to try and work on our behaviors and our habits so that we and that's the thing, again, like this is where I come back to prevention over healing. Like, wouldn't it be great to just help young people do that from the get-go, like so they don't even have to struggle with what we're struggling with now as adults, where we still remember a time when life was kind of more simple and maybe there were less stimulants, less stimuli. Yeah, check out these birds. Speaking of stimuli, check them out. These are peacocks that roam freely in this park and are famous. The park is famous for this. Whoa! And the pigeons. That's nice, right? Speaking of stimuli, I think that's actually a pretty fitting summary. I'm just going to wrap it up here. Thanks.